Good morning and welcome to this, the 12th meeting of the Welfare Reform Committee for 2013. Could everyone please ensure that the mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off, please? Thanks. We go to agenda item 1, which is the declaration of interests. We have a new member of the committee, Ken McIntosh, and I invite Ken to declare any relevant interests.
Nothing to declare, Commissioner.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. And as is normal practice, I would just like to thank Ian Gray for his contribution while he was on the committee. And that takes us to agenda item 2, which is to consider a decision on whether to take items 7 and 8 in private. Item 7 is consideration of the committee's approach to the Scottish Government's draft budget scrutiny for 2014-15, and item 8 is consideration of the committee's future work programme. The committee is also invited to decide whether to take consideration of evidence received on the Scottish Government's draft budget 2014-15 in private at all future meetings. And finally, the committee is invited to decide whether consideration of a draft report on the Scottish Government draft budget 2014-15 should be taken in private at all future meetings. We have agreement on that? That's agreed. And the third item of business this morning is to ask for the committee's agreement to delegate to me as convener responsibility for arranging for the SPCB to pay under Rule 12.4.3 any expenses of witnesses on the scrutiny of the draft budget. Members happy with that? Okay, the fourth item is our You Say session on the bedroom tax. Your Say sessions to date have proved an invaluable way for the committee to hear from people across Scotland on their views and personal experiences of the new welfare system. I'd like to welcome to today's witnesses who are here to speak about their experiences of the bedroom tax. They are Anne Bradley, Lindsay Ferry and Scott Wilson. Committee members have met Anne before at our previous informal committee meeting in Glasgow in April, and Lindsay is here today to speak on behalf of her mother, Linda Kennedy. I'd like to invite witnesses to read their submissions to the committee. Following this, members will be invited to speak about the witnesses' experiences, and I think we're going to start with you first, Lindsay, is that?
That's correct.
Okay, over to you.
My name is Linda Kennedy. I am 58 years old. I have not worked for the past 8 years. 6 of those years I was a full-time carer to my late husband, who passed away on the 25th of February 2011. We were offered help with this care. However, we both decided I would take care of him, giving him the dignity he deserved. Like many others, we have always worked. My late husband had a saying, "Everybody must put into the pot, and if they don't, there will be no pot," referring to tax and national insurance. I still have those values. At present, I suffer from anxiety and panic attacks, but I am getting help for this. My total income is £72.07 per week, which is my late husband's work pension. The powers to be take £1.07 off, as the government says I only need £71 per week to live off. My problem is that I live in a 3-bedroom house alone. My kids have moved out into their own homes. I had a visit from my housing officer telling me it would be just under £100 per month extra, but the rent rise in April could take me to over £100 per month. He informed me I could either take in family members or a lodger to help pay the bedroom tax, or move to a smaller house. I fear what the future holds and question, what do I do next? Where do I go? And where will I end up? I have lost everything, my husband and now potentially my family home. I know I'm only the tenant, however, I class this as my home with many great memories. I know my neighbours and they know me. Ultimately, I feel safe here. To end this narrative, I was told, well, you should have bought your house. Like many others, we worked hard, paid the bills and helped a family through their formative years and education. I refuse to beat myself up for being widowed and not a homeowner. Both my kids are fortunate to be in full-time employment and not on benefits. They feel angry and disillusioned that their mother cannot get a bit of respite from the pot.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Scott, do you want to go next?
Hi, I would like to tell you about my experiences of the welfare system, and particularly how the under-occupancy charge will affect me and my family. My name's Scott Wilson. I'm 46-year-old and was diagnosed with younger onset Parkinson's disease 5 years ago. I'd always worked hard since I was 16. Because of Parkinson's, I had to give up the successful gardening business I had built up over the many years and my decade of service as a reserve firefighter in South Lanarkshire, where I live. One of my Parkinson's symptoms is a very severe tremor which got worse over time and didn't respond to medication. I had to have brain surgery, which has helped to control the tremors, but I still have other Parkinson's symptoms. Parkinson's is a progressive condition, so it will inevitably deteriorate, and stress makes my symptoms much worse. When I gave up my business, I had to apply for benefits to help support myself and my family. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son who has a severe long-term medical condition. The last thing I wanted was to have to rely on the government benefits, but I felt that at least I had worked hard and contributed to the system before I became ill. I had lots of support from Money Matters in Lanark, who made sure I claimed the benefits I was entitled to, including incapacity benefit, income support, and an indefinite award of disability living allowance. While life was not easy, and I knew that I had an uncertain future because of my health, knowing that I could stay in my home and had some money that I could depend on made it much easier to cope. Since the Welfare Reform Act has come in, I feel really stressed and anxious at the thought that someone who has no knowledge of my condition will reassess my benefits, and that then they could determine that if I am fit for work, or that if I am not affected by my Parkinson's, and that I could lose my benefits I depend on. I was broken-hearted to give up my business and would love to be well enough to work, but my Parkinson's makes it impossible. I recently separated from my partner of nearly 20 years, partly because of the stress that Parkinson's has put in my family life and relationship. It's been a very difficult time for all of us, but we have maintained regular contact, and my ex-partner and I continue to share the parenting of our children. It has been made worse by the fact that I have had to apply for some different benefits, and in particular the under-occupancy charge bedroom tax that will come into force in April. I have lived in my home for 25 years and had to sell it back to the council because of financial hardship. I was shocked when a council employee phoned me and told me that my housing benefit would be cut to the equivalent of a one-bedroom home, and that I would have to find any of the additional money from my benefits to pay for 2 bedrooms. I was stressed enough about how I was going to pay for my heating, food, transport and other necessities, and this information floored me. When I asked for more information, the council employee told me that I had 3 options. 1, the council could look at rehoming me in a 1-bedroom flat. There are very few of these in my hometown, so I might be relocated somewhere else, which could be many miles away. This would put me away from my support system, including my friends and family, and the health centre that deals with my day-to-day health needs, where the staff know me and are able to give me the help that I need. And I may not even be able to access a 1-bedroom flat in another town, as there is lots of other people needing 1-bedroom homes than there are flats available. 2, they could also look at house sharing with someone else who was on benefits. This would mean sharing my home with a stranger whose background I didn't know, and possibly exposing my children and myself to risks. And 3, that if I did stay in my house, I would have to find the shortfall in the rent myself from my other benefits. I asked the person on the phone about how I could have my daughter and expected grandchild or my disabled son to come and stay with me if I moved to a 1-bedroom flat or shared my home. I asked where they were expected to sleep and was told, "Have you ever heard of inflatable beds?" This took my breath away. I was literally speechless that the love and support of my children and their need to spend quality time with their father could be so casually dismissed. I also inquired about what happens when my Parkinson's get worse. As Parkinson's is an incurable degenerative disease, I will progressively become more disabled, and I am likely to need more support over time. Because I am no longer with my ex-partner, I may need a live-in carer to support me. I asked where a carer would stay. The reply was, "We can cross that bridge when we come to it." So I may now be unable to make any plans for the future until I am really unwell, when I might not be able to access the type of accommodation that I would need. I was stunned by the lack of sympathy and understanding for people in my position. I am so anxious about the whole situation, and I am concerned about the effect that this is having on my Parkinson's. This seems to be being rushed through and feels as though the government in Westminster has not thought through the consequences for people like me who have the benefit systems it's supposed to help. I can't believe that this is really being suggested, and hope that people will take notice and do what is right and call a halt to this process.
Thanks very much, Scott. Anne, over to you.
Excuse me. I read the article in the Evening Times regarding the bedroom tax, and I believed then, and I still do, that this tax is a breach of everyone's human rights and it should have been dumped. I had a 2-bedroom flat rented from Queen's Cross Housing Association, and letters were delivered from the housing office with advice on the bedroom tax cost and payment methods, and the letters informed me that the cost of this tax would be £43.64 per month, and this went up to £47.64 per month, and this amount will rise with each rent increase. I contacted the Housing Association myself to make them aware of my request to be moved to a smaller property and that I wished to stay in the same area. The Housing Association submitted a completed transfer application for a move and also an application form for the DHP. I was advised that they did not know when I would be likely to secure a transfer, since there were no smaller properties available in the area I wished. The suggestion was made that I could take in a lodger, but I informed the Housing Association that this was not something I would ever consider, and I would never take a stranger into my home. If I were to take in a lodger, the housing benefit would have been reduced even further because I had someone living with me, and this would have affected the ESA also and created a further struggle, since after paying direct debits there is not much of the ESA left. Since there were no smaller properties available, I believed I should not have to pay this tax, since I was willing to move but was unable to do so. The struggle with this matter will become much worse when the universal credit is introduced and the payment for rent and the benefits are to be paid into one bank account and left to the claimant to pay the rent. I believe that I was forced out of my home and prevented from having a family life, since I shall not be able to have family members stay overnight or at weekends. In order for me to find a smaller property to rent, and since there were no smaller properties in Glasgow, I believed that I would be forced to look further afield for a suitable property, and I believed that I would have to apply for a private let, which would have created even more of a problem. The bedroom tax is unjust, and it has separated me from my family, since I believed that I would have to move to where I could get a smaller property to rent. In July, I viewed a smaller property, still in the area I wished, and I was given overnight to make a decision to either accept or decline the offer. Since I was advised that if I declined the offer, it was unlikely I would be granted the DHP a second time. Having been advised of this, I believed I did not have a choice, and I felt that I was forced to accept this property. In accepting this property, it created a further struggle, since I was not in a good financial position to pay for a move within the 28 days given. Had it not been for my family, I would have not been able to move, and I would now owe my family a lot of money. Since moving into the property, I have become isolated, since at my previous property I spoke to and met neighbours every day, and since moving to this new address I never speak or meet anyone. I am not happy in the new flat, since it is a deck access property and there are people passing my door at all times, both day and night, and it makes me uncomfortable. I can't get used to this. The property is so small it could fit inside my previous flat. I'm not happy with this property, as it is not as enclosed as my previous flat, which, although it was 12 floors up, I would not have moved but for the bedroom tax, and I do not believe that I should be able to settle in this flat.
Thanks very much, Anne. I know it's difficult for you all to have to recount that, but as with all the hearsay witnesses we've had, the evidence that you've given us has been really helpful, and it's given us an opportunity to ask questions of you to get a greater understanding. When Anne, you mentioned that discretionary housing payment was involved in the situation you were involved in. But Lindsay and Scott, you didn't quite mention whether there had been any discussions with the housing officials who contacted you, or your mother in your case, Lindsay. So, in terms of the support that was given, or the advice that was given, were actual offers of alternative houses made available? The officer said that that was an option, but was it actually made an option, an actual offer of an alternative? And secondly, were there any discussions around additional support from discretionary housing payments when the housing officials contacted you?
Go first. Yep, that's fine. As far as I'm aware, my mum got a initial 3 months discretionary payment, but that was about it. I don't believe there were any options of any other alternative one-bedroom flats made available to her, so it was up to myself and my brother to kind of come up with the goods,
Okay.
to pay the rent.
Scott, what about yourself?
Me personally, I was not offered anything at all. At the time, it just came out, and the person I was speaking to at the time knew very little about the system itself. So the information I got was quite sparse off of him regarding like one-bedroom houses. And in the area I'm in, I know for a fact that we're lucky if there's a dozen one-bedroom houses. And for me to move out a two-bedroom house into a one-bedroom and trying to fit all my furniture and everything into a one-bedroom house just wouldn't be feasible anyway.
Yeah, but the additional costs, I mean, you're already
Yeah.
under pressure because
Exactly.
of the cut in benefits.
Yeah.
To then have to consider costs of
A
removals or storage,
I know.
whatever, it just makes it
Yeah.
impossible, practically impossible to do what's being demanded of you.
Yeah.
I mean, Anne, you've been through the process, and obviously it was not a comfortable one for you, and I can see the trauma that it's caused you.
No, moving, I'm not comfortable with the move I've had.
So, in terms of the discussion you had with the Housing Association officials, they made an offer to you, but was it an offer that was put to you as a part of a package, or was it a take it or leave it, you have to go?
It was a take it or leave it.
Yep.
If I didn't move, I'd have had to find the money to pay the bedroom tax. I wouldn't have got the DHP. I was awarded DHP from April to September, but in the 26th of July, I was offered this house, and I got overnight to accept it, whether it was take it or leave it. If I didn't take it, I wouldn't have got a help with the
So
DHP
you didn't feel
again.
that they were taking into consideration your individual circumstances?
No.
It was just that there was a flat available and you had to take it, or you were...
Yeah, that's how I believe it was.
Okay. Jamie, do you want to...
Thank you, convener, and my first questions for Lindsay, and thank you for coming today to give us the benefit of your evidence and your mother's experience. I mean, clearly from the submission that your mother's provided us and you read out for us, Lindsay, she obviously views, as I think anyone would, where she lives is her home. But she feels now that she could potentially lose that family home. I mean, is she actively looking to move elsewhere, or is this just a concern that she may have to?
No, at the moment she's not actively looking. Myself and my brother have decided that we'll have to come up with extra money,
Okay.
which I think is a deeply unpopular policy that's been brought in, and obviously it's directly affected her. And I just don't want to be putting her in that position, so we've kind of had to
So
help out.
the burden's actually falling on you and your
Yep.
brother, and
Yep.
you have your own families, presumably?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, your parent, I mean, clearly imbued throughout the statement you read out, it's clear your parents worked hard over the course of their lives, and they felt that the system was there to support them at a time when they required it. I mean,
Yep.
how do you, as a family, feel that system is working in that regard?
I totally agree with her. My mum and dad have always worked, and this is the situation she's been left in. It's really unfortunate,
But-
and
but-
through no
but-
fault of her own.
What I mean, really, I suppose,
Sorry.
is given that is what their understanding of the system was, your understanding of the system was, does the system match that expectation?
Yeah.
Do you feel it? Do you feel it is? I mean, how do you feel about the system in place now? The social security system, the welfare system. Is it there is that pot there for people to draw on when they've contributed?
In my personal opinion, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. And turning to you, Scott, you've set out the three options that you were provided by the council employee you spoke with, and clearly there's concern that, you know, even if you were rehoused, you know, or looking to be rehoused, it may not be a realistic possibility because of the lack of available stock. But presuming you were rehoused, you know, somewhere away from where where is it you live in? So
Living bigger.
So say you were rehoused in Hamilton or
I wouldn't go.
East Kilbride. say that's where you were offered. That's the only place you were offered, though. You know, what would the impact in your family life if that?
It would be devastating. I mean, my son's got a disability that he's actually going for a very serious operation in the next couple of weeks, and if I'm staying 20 miles away from him, I need to be close, and then I need my support as well from my family, my friends, everyone who knows me, knows my condition and knows how to deal with it. To be told that I need to move 20 miles away would just be totally devastating. And after a house that I've stayed in for 25 years plus, and I'm getting told that because the government's got a shortfall in 2-3 bedroom houses, they want to move me out because it's over-occupied. It's ridiculous. It's terrible.
And I mean, clearly that's a severe impact on your family. Do you get any sense that that's been taken on board at all, taken account of? I
don't think so at all. They haven't looked at it at all. I mean, I've got a medical condition. My son's got a medical condition. I've just been made a grandfather for the first time in a few months ago as well, and they're expecting me to destroy my family life just for the sake of going and moving into a one-bedroom house. And I'm afraid, no, I'll fight it all the way rather than I'll no go.
Okay, thanks for that, Scott. And turning to yourself, I mean, when I saw or had heard through the clerks that you'd got a new place, I was going to start off by congratulating you. But I mean, given the evidence you've provided, it doesn't seem appropriate. I mean, you've told us a little bit how it's affected you in terms of having to have gone through the move, but you know, where you are now, how has it affected you having to be rehoused in your new place?
Well, as I said, I'm not happy with it. If it hadn't been for the bedroom tax, I'd still be in my previous flat. But I mean, it's costed me money financially. Well, no, me and my family. They helped me to move. If it hadn't been for them, I wouldn't have been able to move. But now I owe them money. And the flat, when I got the flat, it was in a terrible state, and although the Housing Association gave me a paint package, it hasn't worked out, and I'm not happy with the flat.
You also said, and if you don't feel comfortable answering, of course don't, but you said you feel isolated in the
Yes.
new place. I mean,
yeah, well, in my last place, as I said, I met people every single day, spoke to people every single day. I've been in this new place since the 26th of July, well, 26th of August. I think that was the date I went in, that was the 28 days up. I haven't met anyone. I don't meet people, I haven't spoke to anyone, and I feel totally isolated.
I'm really sorry to hear that, and yet we know that there is a shortage of accommodation for people to downsize,
yes.
Whether or not they want to, if they were looking to. There is that shortage of accommodation. So some people might say to you, you're one of the lucky ones, but I mean, how would you respond to anyone saying that to you?
Well, I'd say no, I'm not. Okay, I got offered a one-bedroom flat, but it is so pokey, I can't fit anything in. I'm not happy with it, and one bedroom, it's just a piece of nonsense offering people properties like this. I mean, as I say, it's so small, I could fit that inside my last property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kevin.
And thanks a lot for your evidence today, folks. I wonder if I can maybe start by asking Lindsay a couple of questions, and it's round about the evidence that your mum has given, saying that her total income was £72.7 a week, that £1.7 was hauled back by government. Obviously, above that, she has housing benefit. Is there any other thing that your mum gets from the state in that regard? And we have a situation where she gets your dad's pension and they take £1.7 back?
Yep.
Okay, I think it was right to clarify that because, you know, one of the things which the Westminster government seems to think is that people get huge amounts of money on benefit, but what we have here is a situation where your mum's on no other benefit
Not at
other
all.
than your dad's works pension
Yep.
and that housing benefit. Thank you. In terms of the payments that you and your brother have decided to make, and please feel free not to answer that, what effect does that have on your family and your brother's family having to make those payments? What do you miss out on because you have to do that?
I'm actually expecting a baby myself, so extra money would have gone to the baby, but I'm in a position where I have to help my mum.
And how does your mum feel about that? Obviously, it says that she's got anxiety and panic attacks at this moment. I know from my own perspective, if my folks were having to get money off of us,
Well, it's
that would
embarrassing
make them
for her.
very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable, yep. But my brother and I have decided that she is in her home and that's where she'll stay. So if that's the only way around it, then
But you
it's
have
what
to
we
miss
have to
out
do.
to
Yeah,
allow that to
unfortunately, yeah.
happen.
But
And that obviously has an effect on her
Yeah.
too. Thank you very much for that. Scott, obviously, the situation that you have found yourself in, where to begin with, it seems like the folk at the council were rather unhelpful, to say the least, and quite cheeky in regards to some of the things that have been said to you, including the inflatable beds.
Yeah.
What effect would there be on your son if you had to move elsewhere? I know you said you haven't, but if you reached that position, what effect would it
Just
have
now,
on him?
it would have a devastating effect on my son because I've had a recent split with my ex-partner at 20 years. So obviously my son's he's 10-year-old. So that's been hard enough for him to cope with as well. And then they moved house because I couldn't afford to private rent anywhere in my area because it's that expensive. It would totally destroy him if I had to go away 20 miles away or outside, because I only live 3 miles from him just now. So it's easy for me to get seeing him. I see him through the week, I see him at weekends. If I had to stay 20 miles away, I'm hard enough to try and pay for my heating, my electric, my gas, everything else, council tax, and then I would have to fork out a fortune in diesel to go back and forth to see him, and it would devastate him to know. It would devastate me, no seeing him. So yeah, it would be pretty much quite bad for him. I would say.
You talked about being close to your own support networks, and obviously you provide that support network for your son too. You're part of his support network. If you weren't there or nearby to help cope with the situation of your son, what kind of position would that put your ex-partner in?
It would put an awful lot of pressure on my ex-partner because of the condition he has. He has to get in and out of hospital a lot to get really quite serious operations done. So we need to be on, sometimes we're on 24-hour call from the hospital to say, right, you've got 24 hours with a slot coming up. My son can go in and get his operation. So if I'm away 20 miles away and they get the 24-hour call and say, right, we need to, I mean, it would just be, my ex-partner would be her wit's end as well. I mean, she's finding it hard enough as well with my son. She's a full-time carer for him. So, I mean, for that as well, I mean, it's just, I put all the pressure onto the both of us as well. So we both feel the pressure equally. But I would say, yeah, it'd be devastating on her as well.
Thank you. And you talked about the fact of moving and your family bearing the costs for those moves. Now, I don't know what those costs are, and you may wish to say you may not. But was there no offer of support from any other organisation in terms of helping you meet those costs to move?
There was no offer from anyone.
None at all?
None at all.
So if it wasn't for the goodness of your family,
I would I'd probably be homeless now, because I had already signed the lease for the new flat, and my tenancy ended in my previous flat. So if I hadn't had that help to move, I wouldn't have been able to move in, and I'd have been homeless.
Thank you. So basically, convener, and it's a quick question for all of the witnesses. The bedroom tax itself is not only affecting you as individuals, or in your case, Lindsay, your mum. It's having an effect on your families too. Yes. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. Definitely.
So if it wasn't for families helping in some regards, you'd be in an even worse position than you are at present. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you, convener.
Linda.
Yeah, hi guys. Lindsay, the thing that really stuck out at me from your mum's submission was towards the end, where she says, I know I'm only the tenant.
That's the way she feels.
Absolutely, and I just think it's such a very, very sad thing to see somebody saying. Can you tell me how long your family lived in that house?
I think it's about 14 years.
Right. Aye. So after, and I presume from what you're saying about your dad having worked and then become ill and everything, you know, there were people who paid their rent in time, did all the stuff, and considered they had a family home.
Yep.
And now your mum feels that it's not a home anymore.
That's right.
And yourself, Scott, you said in your submission that you had to sell the house back to the council. Was that the mortgage to rent scheme? Or something like that, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you felt that was a way of keeping your home and keeping your family
I mean,
together
that was my way. Rather than putting my house on the market and then having to look for another house, which I knew I couldn't find one in my hometown for the prices that they were going for. The mortgage to rent was the only way for me to be able to stay in my family home. The way that I'd done everything, decorated the house, even down to what colour I'd painted a wall. That was my personal house. That was my space.
It's your home?
Yeah, my home. And that's it.
And do you feel like Linda Kennedy now, like Lindsay's mum, that all of a sudden what's always been your home and you've fought to keep?
Yeah, it's like somebody wants to take it away from me. It's somebody just wants to take it away and give it to somebody else and rip out my kitchen that I put in, rip out my bathroom, rip out everything and just give it to somebody else just for the sake of getting the government, making it easier for the government just to get some clawback, some money.
Mm. And Anne, you've lost your home?
I haven't lost my home.
But you've lost what you consider to be your home, and you've moved
Yes.
to somewhere. Yeah, I think you said that you don't feel it's like home.
No, it's definitely not like home. No, there's no way I could make that flat I'm in now my home. I just, I'm not comfortable there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in this submission, Anne, and I think you did before from memory, you know, your view that you know, this policy is like against human rights and has such a devastating effect on folk. You may have heard earlier that Michael, convener, saying that we did try to see the UN reporter on human rights, and I just wondered what you would say to somebody like that, you know, about what's happened to you if you were able to sit face to face with them.
Well, I mean, it's not just me. The bedroom tax is a nightmare for everybody that's involved with it, and it is against human rights. I mean, it's making people lose their homes, taking away half the money they have to live on. It's not right. The whole tax thing is a nightmare, and it's unjust, and it is against their human rights, everybody's human rights, and it should be discarded. It should be abolished.
Would either of you like to add anything to that in relation to the fact that this is people's homes we're talking about, not just a house that they happen to get a shot of for a wee while?
It is. I mean, I've stayed in the house for over 25 years now, so it is my home. I wouldn't know how to go about starting again in another home. I mean, it's the upheaval it causes for families, and just not just the families, the upheaval it causes for everybody, friends and everything. It's ridiculous. It's terrible.
I would just fear that if she didn't have myself or my brother, it would just be devastating on her mental health and well-being. Everything's just...
Yeah, thanks very much. I don't know what else to say to you guys, because it's just, you know, to think that we're sitting in a country where there's a government in London that's imposing homelessness on people is just hard to take in. Thank you, Convener.
Ken.
Thank you, Convener. Can I also second my thanks to all of you for coming and giving evidence to us today. Lindsay, can I also just thank you for bringing us some good news as well with your pregnancy. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Cheered it up. Amongst everything else. Don't have to answer if you don't want to, but can you just tell us what happened to your mum in terms of rent arrears? Obviously, you've all responded in different ways, and your family are now, you and your brother are helping your mother. Had she already got herself into arrears, or was she simply feeling the anxiety, or was she making sacrifices in other parts of her expenditure?
Previous to the bedroom tax? Or
No, after the bedroom tax was introduced.
After the bedroom tax.
Did that cause her to go into arrears, or did she manage to cut back on her other expenditure to make sure she paid it?
As far as I'm aware, I don't think she did go into arrears, but I couldn't quite confirm that 100%.
But she was struggling to pay, but she was making
struggling
cuts
to
in
live
other-
as it is, put it that way. I mean, that kind of details how much she lives on, and
No,
if
absolutely.
they think that's acceptable, then
Well, I think most of us would look at that and wonder how on earth she could actually cut any of her income to
Exactly,
any of her expenditure, I
exactly.
should say.
Yeah.
Did she take any advice in terms of income maximisation, you know, going to Citizens Advice Bureau or benefits advisors to see if there's any way of increasing any other benefits she might be eligible for?
I think she did, and was told that there was no other benefit available to her, as far as I'm aware. So,
And I've got to ask you as well, because clearly your family helped with the move and so on. Did you move you felt there was a gun put to your head to make you move?
Yes.
Would you have found yourself in arrears if you hadn't taken that offer?
Yes, I probably would have, because I wouldn't have been able to afford the bedroom tax. So yes, I would have ended up in rent arrears because of it.
But in your case, you were careful not to get into that situation. That's the
Yes.
point. Yes. And did you also try and one of the responses that we're supporting as a parliament and is to try and trying to provide further advice to people, just to make sure a lot of people don't claim all the benefits to which they are entitled and the help that is there. Did you go to Citizen Advice or to the Benefits Advice people to try?
No, it was actually my housing officer who spoke about maximising my money. There's no way I could have cut anything from the money that I have going out. There was no way I could have cut any of that to afford the bedroom tax.
That's right. And there was nothing else that you weren't claiming?
No, there
that
was
you were
nothing
entitled
else
to,
I was
yes.
entitled to.
And Scott, for yourself too, you're still in the situation. I mean,
Yeah.
Anne's now moved. Lindsay and her brother are helping her mum. What's going to happen to you? Are you going to find yourself in a situation of arrears soon, or do you think
I
you'll
most
go
probably am in arrears at the moment. I've had no letters from the council yet, but I'm expecting one. Because it's just, I mean, it's nearly, people think just because it's nearly £10 a week, that that's nothing. But when you're only getting a pittance to live on, £10 a week coming into the winter time, gas, electric prices are going up all the time. It's cost me an absolute arm and a leg to try and keep myself alive, more or less, and to try and keep seeing my family. So when something's got to give, it's got to give, and it's, to me, my bedroom tax is the last thing in my mind that I'm wanting to pay.
Now, I think that the humanity of the situation is clear to all of us. It's and in some ways, one of the things this committee is going to have to try and think about is what we can do to help, given that the bedroom tax itself has been introduced by a separate government. Is there anything in particular? Income maximisation clearly doesn't work in the sense that you're claiming what you're entitled to, your mum in your case, claiming what they're entitled to.
I mean, I've been to Money Matters. When I went to Money Matters, and they were great. They helped me out with find what benefits I was entitled to, all the benefits I could get, everything like that, and they were really good. But it only comes to a point they can't drag any more money out that I'm not entitled to. So when the government's asking me to give back some of the money that I'm entitled to, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, why give me it in the first place and just say, well, we'll not give you that and that's towards your house, instead of giving me it and then asking for it back.
It's a bit unfair to ask you this because I mean you're at the sharp end, as it were, but
Yeah.
not making the policy. But is there anything that you can think that we could do here in the Scottish Parliament, for example, or the local authority could do to help? That's not doing.
Scrap it.
Scrap it would be the thing that I think
Yeah.
unanimity on the
And I mean, I know
unity.
you've got to claw back money somehow, but the way that they're doing it is they're clawing back the money from the people that need it most, that need the actual benefits the most, and need the home security that they've got, because they struggle enough without the security. If they didn't have that, it would devastate people.
Have you claimed the discretionary payments at all?
I'm actually unsure if I ever know. I'm not sure, to be quite honest.
Right. And did you claim the discretionary payments?
Yes, I did.
You did. But I think you said in your evidence that you wouldn't be able to claim them again. You were advised that you'd...
I was advised I wouldn't get it a second time if I refused the flat that I'm in now. I wouldn't have got the DHP a second time.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Convener, and thank you all very much for coming along today and sharing with us what is really very personal information and you know, really in an ideal world you shouldn't have to do that, and the fact that you are prepared to do it I think is indicative of how strongly you feel about the injustice of this tax. And indeed, Scott, you said that it should be scrapped. I personally would love to see it scrapped, but we don't have the power to scrap it. That lies with the government elsewhere. But there's one issue I wish to pick up in respect of the evidence of two of you. And first, Lindsay, if I could just raise the issue of the advice that was given, which again follows what the Westminster policy is, which is that, oh, well, you should consider, your mother should consider taking in a lodger. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you personally what you and your brother feel about that as a matter of policy advice? That is the policy dictated by people like the UK Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and his minister, Lord Freud, who presumably doesn't have these difficulties in life, on speaking on behalf of the Westminster Government. But what do you and your brother, what did you feel when you heard, well, that was what I was advised to do? What did that make you feel?
I was just kind of left in shock. I mean, obviously she's lost my dad and then been told to take in a stranger, and they think that that's normal, and I'm afraid we're just not accepting it. So.
And can I ask if it was something then that was perhaps discussed amongst your wider circle? So this situation was presented to your mother and all the difficulties that she's been through over the recent years, and obviously the immediate family, the extended family, the friends, the neighbours, all the people in her circle. When they heard this, what did they feel? That this would be the solution to her situation, a situation that she has done nothing to create?
Yeah, like
what did
like
they
us,
feel, taking a lodger to a 50-year-old widow? What did they feel about that?
Yeah, like us, they were just totally appalled. So.
Well, absolutely, I would say. Anne, if I may turn to you on the same issue, and you had, and as far as I recall, it was an issue that you rightly raised when we met with you earlier in April, and you make the point, you go on to make the point that aside from the decency or otherwise of such a policy, you talk about the efficacy of the policy, which in your situation, if you had proceeded down that route, it actually would have cost you financially rather than help the situation. Could you expand on that a wee bit, please?
Well, before the bedroom tax came in, I was getting full housing benefit. That was reduced for the bedroom tax. If I'd taken a lodger in with me, that would have been reduced even more because there was a second person in the flat living with me. So yes, I wouldn't have taken a lodger, apart from the fact that, as Lindsay said, I wouldn't take a stranger into my home.
So, I mean, it's clear to you and from your particular situation that actually it was, in any event, was not a practicable solution because it would have put you in a worse situation than you otherwise would have been. Scott, if I could turn to you, and there was just another issue I wish to air today, and two issues. One, the issue of the shared parenting. So you have shared parenting. It's not clear from what you have provided by way of written information exactly how that is, if that's subject to a legal agreement or if it's just a practical arrangement, and it may be that there would be different consequences in light of that. But on the basis that as a matter of practicality you have shared parenting for certainly your son who has, as we have heard, particular needs, how would it be possible for you to then provide, to carry out your parental duties in circumstances where you were forced to move to a one-bedroom flat with an inflatable bed? Would he be able to lie on an inflatable bed anyway? Would that be safe for him,
Well,
given his needs?
it would be me that would be giving up the inflatable bed, my bed to give to him, and then me sleeping in an inflatable bed, which is just not practical for me.
Well, given
I
that
get
you-
little enough sleep as it is, so to do that, to be quite honest, I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
And then as for your young daughter, who
Yeah.
I take it it's your young daughter that has recently
Yeah,
had your grandchild, which again, congratulations. There's
Thank you.
at least some nice information coming out this morning. But I mean, in a one-bedroom flat, you couldn't have your daughter and your grandchild to stay at the same time, and
No,
certainly not
I
at the
couldn't.
same time as your
No,
son. So you
no.
couldn't enjoy your family together,
Exactly.
and the siblings couldn't enjoy their time
I
together.
mean, they bring in laws where you can't have a female and a male within certain ages staying in the same room. So how do they expect a 10-year-old boy and an 18-year-old girl to share a room? They just don't think about things like this. And this is the things that affect people like myself, that put the stress on people like myself, that worry about their family enough as it is, without having to worry about a stupid tax like this.
And if I may say, I mean, as you rightly point out, on the basis that you have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and some years ago now, obviously that is reactive as far as medical information goes at the moment to stresses, and its deleterious impacts can be felt because of additional stress in your life.
Yeah.
So this situation is not good for your health, but looking to the future, as you have stated, it is a degenerative condition, as you will well know, and the medical profession states quite unequivocally. Why then would you think it would be possible for a government, in this case the Westminster government, to set a policy that in effect is saying that it is not a degenerative condition, that there won't be a time when you need an extra bedroom for a carer, notwithstanding that all the medical evidence is to the contrary? How do you think a government can get away with that?
Totally disgusted, to be quite honest. I mean, why should it, steering off a little bit, I mean, why should I have to go for an interview to see if I'm fit and able to go to work when I've got a degenerative disease? It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse, if anything. And then they're asking me to go every 3 years or whatever it is for an interview. I mean, it's just, they don't look into, they should individually look into every case and determine it on that, instead of just blocking people together and just saying, right, you lot, right, that's it, you just pay this bedroom tax and get on with it and like it or lump it. And it's just, it's not happening for me, I'm afraid.
Thank you all very much for coming.
I wanted to go back to something that it was Scott Wilson that raised, but I would be interested to hear what other people had to say as well. And that was when you were talking about the people you had to deal with directly. I think the line you used was the lack of sympathy for your condition. Now, the question I would have asked you at the time, but I didn't want to interrupt, was who exactly are we talking about here? Are we talking about people from the DWP? Are we talking about people from...
It would be actually the council of the Housing Association, the council that I spoke to at the time. Obviously, because the tax hadn't been implemented at the time, so it was still new, they obviously didn't have enough information to give out.
Yeah. So you're now a council tenant, is that the case?
Yes, I'm a council tenant, yeah.
Yeah, and which local authority is that?
South Lanarkshire.
Was it Are we talking here exclusively about people at the council you were talking to, or were there others that were unhelpful or appeared not to understand your
It was
position?
exclusively the council at the time. But the more you get into it, it just seems that there's no sympathy for MD, really, at all, regarding benefit. And I don't blame the people in the benefits offices or anything like that, because they're just telling me what they've been told to say, and it's the government that are posting all these things for them to say, so I don't blame anyone.
Is that experience the same for Anne and for Lindsay, or for Lindsay's mother, or is there a difference in performance in different local authority areas? Are council staff better in some areas than in others?
I can't really add to what my mum's already put, but I think it's like Scott's. Yeah.
And did you feel you had the support of?
Yeah, I do believe I had some support from the Housing Association, from Queen's Cross, but not an awful lot.
Mm-hmm. So you don't feel you're in a position to judge the quality of the support you
no.
were given objectively?
Not with the council, no. Can't.
Okay, thank you.
Again, on this issue of the council officials, Scott, you raised this in particular. Linda Fabiani and I went to a meeting in North Lanarkshire where there were officials from North and South Lanarkshire there to talk about how they were preparing for this programme to come into existence. And I was left with the impression that the local authorities knew that they had to be proactively engaged in order to address the types of issues that you were going to be confronted with. That would, you know, that might be their policy intention, that might be the intention of the management, but it would appear from what you have said that the officers who actually are doing the engagement are just going through things as a matter of fact course. They're just dealing with you and giving you information, but not actually engaging with you to try and work through the situation. It's just matter of fact, here's the situation, here's what you're left with, here's your options, and there's nothing beyond that. Is that the impression you were left with? Yeah.
The council, as far as I'm concerned, have been great with me for other things apart from the bedroom tax. The bedroom tax, before it was implemented, they obviously were very sparse in information like everyone else was, so I can't particularly blame that one person, but I mean, it's the way that they talk to me. I mean, to tell me, oh, have you heard of a blow-up bed now? The training that he obviously had he wasn't reading that off a computer screen or anything else. But I mean, everything else, the support for the council I've had has been great. I mean, they've gave me a wet room now that I stay myself and whatever else, so they've adapted my house.
So they've invested in your house,
yeah, and now I'm getting
been told that you have to leave it.
Move out.
Yeah.
So I mean, where's this common sense? It's costing the council money to do that then.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much to you all for coming along this morning. I knew that this was not going to be an easy situation for you, and it certainly wasn't easy for us to have to hear the impact that these policies are having on you. I mean, I'm always struck by just when we've had your say witnesses here, that we've had an impression from reading what they've told us that things were bad, but to actually hear from the individuals themselves just compounds the felony, if you like, and makes you get first-hand knowledge of what's happening, and it just is beyond me that a government that has a benefit system, and that benefit system by its very definition means that it's the minimum level of support that can be given for people to subsist, to exist and to live their lives. If they then bring in a policy which says, but we're going to take 14% or 25% from that minimum income, then by its very definition, it's putting people below the breadline. And that is not a welfare system that I want to consider to be a valid one. So thanks very much for giving us the first-hand information that you've done this morning. It's been very helpful to us. and we'll take that forward as we continue to look at the implications of these changes. And that's what we're here to do, and that's what we intend to do. Okay, but thanks very much, and I'll recess the committee at the moment until we get our next set of witnesses available. Okay, thanks. Okay, our next agenda item this morning is the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2013 SSI 2013/218 and Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment Number 3 Regulations 2013 SSI 2013/239. These instruments were considered by the Subordinate Legislation Committee at its meeting on the 3rd of September. The committee agreed to draw SSI 2013/2018 to the Parliament's attention on report grounds that, that its drafting appears to be defective. The committee's report explains that it provides that the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Regulations 2012 are amended in accordance with Regulations 10 to 16, when the intention is to amend the Council Tax Reduction State Pension Credit Scotland Regulations 2012. The Scottish Government has acknowledged this error and it's laid the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment Number 3 Regulations 2013, that's the second set of regulations in front of us, on the 9th of August to correct it in time for the coming into force of these regulations on the 1st of October 2013. I also draw the committee's attention to a submission received from CPAG on the regulations. And we are joined by officials from the Scottish Government to consider these two instruments, and I'd like to welcome Colin Brown, the Senior Principal Legal Officer, the Director of Legal Services, and Jenny Brough, the Team Leader, Council Tax Unit. Do members have any questions or any comments that they want to put to the officials at the moment? Ken, I see you indicating.
I hesitate to jump in first. The new member.
Sorry, I'll decide who comes in first.
Roll, right. No, I was waiting for others to go. First of all, can I just ask, thanks very much, Convener, thanks for coming along. Can I just ask, remind us, what happened, there's a wee note in the policy note that it became clear in February 2013 that the Valuation Appeals Committee were not willing to hear, so that the system you had planned, it basically became clear in February that it wasn't going to work at all. Is that right? Just remind me of what happened.
Yes. In February of this year, by law, the original route of appeal for council tax reduction would have been to the Valuation Appeals Committees. And it became clear in February of this year that the VACs would not be able to hear council tax reduction appeals. Mr Swinney wrote to the committee at that point, bringing the committee up to speed on the situation and to inform the committee and Parliament that he'd commissioned Jim McCafferty, the immediate past president of the IRRV, to look at an alternative mechanism for council tax reduction at that time.
I don't want to go over old ground too much, but was there not a series of correspondence last year in 2012 implying that the VACs weren't going to be able to cope with this? I'm surprised it came as late as February 2013. Was not correspondence back in 2012 from the VACs themselves?
I don't have correspondence in front of me from 2012. The Scottish Government was in discussion with the Valuation Appeals Committee throughout 2012 about the arrangements to apply for the council tax reduction scheme. I think it became very clear in February of this year that that was definitely not going to happen. But during that period of 2012, we had been in discussion with the Valuation Appeals Committees about those arrangements. I can certainly follow up and look into previous correspondence in 2012 if that would be helpful.
Yes, I think it's just helpful to know why it happened so late, that it's obviously a last minute change of plan. Can I just ask, in the meantime, until now, the council tax reduction scheme is in place, but there's no method of appeal. What's been happening? Is there a temporary system in place? Who's been hearing the appeals? Have there been any appeals?
From the commencement of the council tax reduction scheme on the 1st of April this year, the first stage of review for someone who wishes to contest their council tax reduction is exactly the same as it would have been for the previous council tax benefit. The first stage would be that they would ask the local authority to reconsider its decision. So they would ask the local authority for a review. And it's only after that stage that they would have gone to appeal under the old council tax benefit arrangements. So the Scottish Government's expectation is that the review process, when it's established for council tax reduction, will be considering cases that have gone beyond the local authority stage in the same kind of timescales that Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service would have considered the old council tax benefit cases. But the first stage is for the applicant to ask the local authority for a review.
So there's no temporary system in place, but there's going to be a backlog building up until October, is that right? And they'll deal with them then?
We have been monitoring the emerging number of cases, and thus far we are aware that there are around, I believe, 20 to 30 cases since April which are likely to be the subject of an appeal. At this time, that's our understanding, 20 to 30 cases.
Right, and when the new regulations do come, well, assuming that we pass these and approve them, when they do come into place, will there be any difficulty in that backlog meeting any deadlines for application or so on? Because there are timescales, I think, within the regulations about how soon you have to apply for and so on, but they'll all qualify for the right of appeal to the new panel.
Yes, the regulations themselves actually provide any outstanding appeal at the time regulation comes into force, then progresses under the new system. Mm-hmm. So the appeal would continue, but it goes to the newly established appeal mechanism.
And assuming a case was successful and there'd be a 6-month delay, would the decision go back to when the original application would be submitted, as it were?
Yes, if that's appropriate in the circumstances of the case.
When you say it's appropriate, I mean, if the decision is to uphold the appeal on council tax, that would assume that there would be a benefit to those applying.
Yes.
So would it be backdated to the original?
It will go back to the original
It
application stage. I'm simply covering the possibility that there may be ongoing changes of circumstances that might affect how an appeal impacts. But yes.
Yes. No, I'm just thinking it could be, these delays will cause a real of expense for those involved if they're successful, as it were, expenditure that they shouldn't necessarily have incurred. There's a number of questions, Convener, in the CPAG document. I don't know, I was going to press on.
I'll go to other people, Kevin, and come back to you if to give other people an opportunity to ask some questions. Yeah. Alex and then Kevin.
Can I start by congratulating Ken on spotting what we were up to previously on the committee, in that the previous regulation, when it came along, while it met with our approval in most ways, of course, had the flaw in it that there wasn't a proper appeals procedure. And we got at that time an undertaking that adjustments would come forward with a proper appeals procedure, and that would happen in a timescale that would not result in the process of appeal being delayed in any way. Can I take it that the issuing of the order we have in front of us and the timescale on which it will apply will fulfil the discussion that we had previously, in that this will now proceed and that appeals will be able to proceed in a normal and timely manner?
Yes, I think when Robin and I appeared before the committee in March, when we discussed that point, we had noted at the time our expectation that this process would be considering the equivalent council tax reduction cases in the same timescales as would have applied under the old council tax benefits arrangements, and that is still our belief.
You mentioned the fact that there were 20 to 30 cases that you had become aware of in the intervening time. Can we be reassured that these 20 or 30 cases would not have proceeded any more quickly had this process been in place earlier, and that they will be able to take advantage of this process now that it's available?
I don't think I'd be able to say exactly how quickly or otherwise they'd have proceeded in terms of being precise under council tax benefit arrangements. I think we are clear that the timescales are broadly similar, but yes, those cases will go forward under the new reviews arrangements that we're putting in place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Alec has covered a fair bit of what I was going to ask there, and I think that previously the committee scrutinised the delay factor and ascertained that there would be no real delays if we, of course, pass this. I want to turn more generally to some of the guidance that will be issued, and in particular concerns, including from CPAG, about representatives for appellants and their rights, because obviously, Convener, there will be some people who will require help in terms of that appeal. Can you maybe give us an indication of what the government's viewpoint is in allowing representatives of appellants at cases and also in terms of reviewing some of the documentation?
It's unfortunate that Robin Haynes was not able to be in front of the committee today, as he has been leading on this work and on the guidance for the Scottish Government. What I can say is that we are working with CPAG and others in the welfare rights sector in the development of the guidance, as well as with local authorities to ensure that we meet everybody's needs within that process. In terms of specific detail about the content of the guidance, which is in preparation at the moment, I'm afraid I would have to ask Robin and colleagues to follow up in writing about that precise question with the committee.
But we can, yeah,
clarifies.
I think that would be useful, but we can be assured that CPAG and other bodies are being consulted as we go along in terms of the guidance, yeah?
Yes, we very much welcome the support
Thank
we've
you,
had from
Convener.
CPAG.
Yeah, it's just a very quick question, Convener. I wonder if Ms Brown could tell us if these amendments were to come into effect, particularly number 2, but also number 3, if they weren't to come into effect, what would be the effect on people on the ground?
Well, quite simply, there would not be a mechanism for reviewing council tax reduction decisions if these regulations were not to come into effect. That's the process that they're intended to create.
So people would have no recourse, they'd have no mechanism for appeal at all?
Carry on.
They would have recourse to a valuation appeal committee, because that is what the regulations currently provide for.
Okay.
And the purpose of these regulations is to close off effectively that route now that valuation appeal committees have made clear that they will not be hearing council tax reduction appeals.
Come back to you, Ken. You wanted to ask a couple of...
Yeah, no, CPAG highlighted a number of issues. One of them was about flexibility, about time limits for appeal. Did you consider this matter?
Yes, that was the point about lack of flexibility in the time limits in the regulations. I think one point I would make where the submission notes that the time limits are not the same as those that would apply under housing benefit. I think necessarily the council tax reduction scheme operates very differently, and so there will be various elements of the scheme which will not be the same as the elements which would have applied under housing benefit. So that's one point where we've had to say CTR is necessarily not the same. But yes, I think on the general point about time limits, we've noted the comments that CPAG have made. At this stage, I think we would wish to see how the arrangements work in practice once the system is up and running.
Just to explore that the appeal system, the system for CTR will be different for housing benefit. Am I not right in thinking that the panel might be the same, or certainly the judge might be the same in each case?
I'm not aware, but we could certainly we could follow that point up. But I'm not aware of the answer to that at the moment.
It would be a separate appeal mechanism under separate regulations. Housing benefit is run by the Department of Work and Pensions. Mm-hmm. This is part of the council tax system, so they are necessarily separate.
No, I make this point. It was a point that CPAG made in their submission to us. I don't know if you've got access to it at 4.3. Do you have access to this document? Or is this a private committee paper, Convener?
No,
we've got it. Yeah.
Just to say, Child Poverty Action Group said at one point that this is actually about an onward appeal as well, which I'll raise in a second. Mr. McCafferty, Mr. McCafferty, who conducted the review of the government, as he pointed out, the lack of an onward appeal will be a particularly difficult situation if the review panel is constituted of the same judge who is hearing an identically worded housing benefit appeal. So I take it from that the judge could be the same and the panel could be the same. Am I wrong in jumping to that conclusion?
Can we come back to you on that point? Because I hadn't looked at that one in detail, but we will come back to you. I think we would reinforce that necessarily they will be very procedurally they will be separate processes under separate legislation, but we can look at that point from CPAG.
Mm-hmm. I think procedurally they will be, and clearly there are two different sets of legislation here. I understand that. My understanding was that they were if you take it from the point of view of the applicant, you know, they'll possibly be appealing housing benefit at the same time they're appealing council tax reduction, using identical language for very similar reasons, if not identical reasons. And in fact, that was a virtue of the system that Mr. McCaffrey was recommending, that they are conducted in that manner. Am I wrong in making that assumption?
No, I think there will certainly be similarities, particularly given that council tax reduction scheme was based on the principles of council tax benefit where possible. But I think we would not want to draw too close a parallel between the two, because they're separate jurisdictions going
Clearly
forward.
they are, yes, I understand that. Anyway, the point, go back to the original question, you've ruled out flexibility. You're not going to introduce, CPAG suggests that you could maybe bring forward an amending regulation, introducing some flexibility at the moment, so that if there's a time scale and somebody is out with that time scale, they can review. Let's say they're in hospital or whatever else reason that they missed the deadline, that there's a process for allowing some flexibility, as there is in housing benefit reviews at the moment. But you've ruled that out, have you?
At the moment, the regulations as they stand are the regulations for the new scheme, but we can look at that as that goes forward and as it's implemented.
And the point I was just raising there, which is the right of onward appeal. In other words, if I think there's an example given here. I think there was a. Well, a party has been unavoidably unable to attend a hearing and give evidence. There's, in housing benefit, there'll be a case of onward appeal here to the same judge, to the same panel. You can, in other words, you appeal. It doesn't make the deadline. You can carry over the appeal to the same panel in housing benefit, but that's not the case here in council tax reduction.
That's correct.
Did you think about it though? Did you think about this point and rule it out, or is it just case? I can see it's not in there now. Did you consider it? Was it considered?
Yes, time limits were considered when we were drafting the regulations.
But ruled out.
And the view was to go with strict time limits at present,
So
albeit quite lengthy time limits.
Yes. And no right of onward appeal either.
There is a technical reason why that was ruled out, which is that actually the powers do not allow for the creation of an appeal system. Appeals within council tax go to valuation appeal committees, and that is the appeal system. The wording of these regulations is a technicality. The wording of these regulations is all about review, and therefore creating a further appeal tier would be difficult because there is no power to create an appeal mechanism. To the extent that's semantics, but it is a constraint on the creation of the system. There's also a policy element, of course, as to how far you wish.
Can you call it onward review then, rather than onward appeal? No.
It's judicial review, actually, is the remedy. So it is a review. It would be judicial review by a court.
That's hugely expensive and unlikely. Yeah. There was another point raised, which if a local authority changes its initial decision, it doesn't seem to be able to just do so without the applicant submitting a fresh application. Is that the case? That was a point again CPAG raised. In other words, somebody makes an appeal, the local authority decides it will change its decision, but to do so, the original applicant will have to submit a fresh application. They can't just set aside their decision. Do you think that's possibly not the case?
I think that's probably not the case. It's quite difficult to be definitive because the regulations leave it to the review panel to determine its mechanisms for managing appeals, and clearly once an appeal is put to that panel, then the conduct of that review becomes a matter for the panel and its own operating rules as to how it proceeds. If we were dealing with a scenario where the council was minded to concede the appeal, technically I think it then needs the panel to agree to it doing that. But I would imagine the panel will not wish to waste its time doing appeals where consensus is broken out.
Yes. I think there's perhaps, I wonder actually, Convener, would it be possible maybe to send the CPAC submission to the government to just ask for their comments?
I think if you want to write to them, Ken, and ask specific questions, I'm not sure that a lot of the questions relate to these regulations. They relate to the regulations that were brought in before, so I think you'd have to seek some clarity on yourself, because we did cover some of these issues in the previous discussion on the regulations. So possibly the reason you're not getting answers directly this morning is because they don't relate specifically to the regulations that are in front of us.
I'm not sure. No, I think the.
It might be worth exploring, Ken. I understand why you would want to. You've got a documentation there from CPAG which is asking questions around this, but we did cover a lot of this in previous discussions, and we identified some problems which were addressed. So I think if you want to pursue specific questions, you'd be at liberty to do that, and it might be fairer than asking the officials this morning who are here to talk about these regulations rather than talk about issues that were covered in another regulation.
Right. No, I think could be wrong, Convener, but I'm pretty sure this document refers to these regulations.
I'm sure it does.
Not to old regulations. So. I'm
It's
a conscious member.
It's not new regulations, Ken. It's the points. I think some of the issues that you're raising are actually pertinent to the former regulations. This is a specific regulation about an amendment to something that needed clarified. So I'm not saying that our officials in front of us this morning don't know their information, but yes, you're asking questions about something that is not relevant to this specific regulation. I'm looking to the officials if that's the case. I don't want to be misleading anyone here, but I don't know that they're worth pursuing a line of questioning on something which is not actually relevant to this regulation. Ms. Prof, you seem to be.
I think some of the questions have covered elements which go beyond what's in legislation and what will be in the procedural guidance as well, which is still under development. So if there are questions about those procedures, then please, we would be very happy to take those in writing if you wanted to follow up. Yes.
No, I'm not. Certainly, my last question was actually going to be whether or not the procedural guidance will come before the committee.
Well,
so
all of that will come before us.
Yeah. I'm not. I have to say, I'm not entirely sure. Clearly, I'm a new member. Not sure what previous discussions took place. My reading of this document from CPAG, which is very helpful, is that it's about this particular piece of supporting legislation before us today. It's not about any other regulations. Yeah. It's about items that are either in there or are not in there, and that were considered or perhaps not considered and haven't been included. So, and it's very much about the policy.
I know that the CPAG document is relevant to this. I read it myself, but I think from what the officials are saying, some of the questions that you're asking in relation to it can't be answered at the moment for a variety of reasons, and it might be worth investigating them in another way, because I don't know that we're making any headway with the line of questioning that's happening.
Right. Well, all I was going to suggest is that we send this document to the government and ask their comments, because I think there's 5 points made, and
I'd be happy to do that if it helps to get the clarification that you're looking for, and it would be useful to the committee to get any points that the government can help us with. I just don't think we're getting them pursuing the lines at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Can I be helpful there as well? I think it would maybe be relevant for Mr McIntosh as a new member to maybe get advice from the clerks in the previous line of questioning that we've undertaken on this particular issue, and beyond that to give him an idea of how the local government system works, which is the first aspect of this.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll go away and do his homework, Kevin, now that you've told him. Annabelle, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, well, just very briefly from here, because in the discussion of the last minutes, I was going to say few, but perhaps slightly longer than a few minutes, some of the points have been dealt with. But in terms of where we are now, I mean, we have looked at a number of these issues, as the convener said. We reached a view. CPAG, when I read the paper this morning, they seem to be going back over older ground to an extent, but that's entirely up to them. Maybe that's what's led to the line of questioning of Ken, which is slightly beyond where the officials are in terms of what they're here today to speak to. I just, having read the regulations, feel that actually the time limits are quite generous. I think they're totally in keeping with what you would expect. The first period of time is 2 months, the second period of time is 42 days. I mean, that's entirely in keeping from my recollection of various kinds of different review procedures. I'm very much welcome that we will be hearing more about the guidance. I think that's crucially important, and CPAG raised very important points about representation and so forth. I think, finally, convener, just from listening to the discussion, I think we do have to accept that there's two separate jurisdictions here, and different things always flow from the fact that you are subject to a different jurisdiction. And I think that's very important to bear in mind in terms of how these regulations are actually presented. And I think it doesn't really do anybody any service to try to, or to inadvertently muddle up the two procedures, because they're two very different processes. Thank you, Convener.
I tried to make that point. If there are no other questions, can I just ask the committee to note the regulations then? Okay. And thank the officials very much for coming in front of us this morning. Thank you. And we will write to get clarification on those issues. We'll clarify them and get some questions to you. Thank you. Our next agenda item is agenda item 6. Linda Fabiani visited Dumfries and Galloway Council because they're one of the welfare reform pilot projects, and I wanted to give Linda the opportunity to give us a report back. So over to you, Linda. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Convener. This visit was just before summer recess, so it was 14th of June, and this is the first opportunity to report back on this and to give Dumfries and Galloway Council the courtesy of having their report on official record, as were all the other pilots on which we reported. So Chief Clerk Simon and I visited, and the pilot for Dumfries and Galloway was a DWP pilot which focused on digital inclusion and budgeting support. They'd chosen digital inclusion because of the poor broadband coverage in their council area. Only 59% of homes, for example, have broadband, and 25% of the area has no coverage at all. And there was also a history there of assisting people to claim housing benefit and council tax reduction in local offices. The digital pilot was operating with online housing benefit and council tax reduction forms since November 2012, and claimants were encouraged to access forms by self-serve initially and then assisted if necessary. Objectives were to increase the digital uptake from 58% to 68%, with 50% of these self-serve. There was also the developing of public access points to reduce staff costs and to understand barriers to claiming online before universal credit comes in. The results that were reported to us that day were 47% of forms received were self-serve against a target at that point of 50%, but 68% of these were completed digitally, against 58% for those who were assisted. There were barriers to digital access that had shown up fairly early on. For example, no home broadband access, quality of broadband access, computer literacy and confidence. Confidence was a big issue with people who were coming in, and I think we were quite impressed by the level of assistance that was being given there. There was an issue too about public access points not convenient to claimant, and perhaps in my general comments it will be seen why. There was also a need to change claimant expectations, and also the expectations of the staff, because they had always been in local offices very hands-on, the staff. So it was part of this pilot project was to teach the staff to be a bit more hands-off and to encourage people to self-serve. As far as budgeting support was concerned, the Council have run these courses for those referred from Job Centre Plus. There were some successes, but there was a difficulty in encouraging attendance. 5 out of 12 courses scheduled had been cancelled. The 64 people had gone through the course. There was an issue there, about the general issue that you have in Dumfries and Galloway about distances people had to travel, transport, etc. But there was also, that shown up very clearly, problems of confidentiality, especially in small communities, because the kind of area, rural area that Dumfries and Galloway is generally, people know each other. So there was quite a clear embarrassment, and that was said to us by some of those who'd attended and who knew people who had chosen not to within communities, a clear embarrassment about being seen to attend something that was about you not being able to manage your money. So it was felt that it might be worth looking at a greater degree of one-to-one than group sessions. I'm laughing here, convener, because I'm hopeless with acronyms and I'm reading my note and it says the biggest technical issue was understanding APR. I haven't a clue what APR stands for. What was that? Oh, is it that simple? Right, okay. I thought I was frightened to say that in case it was something much more complicated. Yeah, so what they were saying there was that people tended to look, and we know that through all the adverts we see on TV and stuff, people tend to look and say, oh, 5%, that's, you know, that's not bad, without totting it up over the year or over the length of a loan via the annual something rate. Annual percentage rate, thank you, Annabelle. So people didn't have an understanding of what their total debt would be should they take out a loan. The average age of attendees was mid-30s and there was a high single-parent account. There was a significant level of debt for those who were attending, an average debt of £25,000. A lot. There were 3 members of the Council's Welfare Reform Subcommittee who attended, and it was interesting that despite party differences, they spoke as one about the problem with the bedroom tax. Geographical factors, as I said, Dumfries and Galloway is a huge area, and there's a high degree of rurality, but there was also an issue about the lack of one-bedroom properties. Dumfries and Galloway Council don't own any properties themselves, they were all transferred. And if I remember rightly, they actually said they had no one-bedroom properties at all, so there was a particular difficulty there. They don't particularly want to provide one-bedroom properties either, because this was the council talking on behalf of the housing partnership, because they see these properties as inflexible, and it's back to what we've been talking about for a long time, about, you know, the culture in Scotland of building homes for life, rather than transitory properties that people take for a wee while and then move on from. And in an area of the particular nature of Dumfries and Galloway, this could be seen as much more important. The Council have briefed the Secretary of State, and they've written to Lord Freud on the issue. They very much wanted to emphasise the particular needs of the council area in terms of the rurality I've mentioned, and also the public transport system. Vast areas to cover, difficulty with public transport. They also have a very low wage economy, generally in a high level of retired people in Dumfries and Galloway. So there were big issues there, and they wanted particular mention of the high subsidy needs of the public transport system to allow people to come in and access places like Job Centre Plus. So particular difficulties there. There is a lack of employment, and jobs that are on offer are generally very low paid. Round off by saying there's been an 800% increase in claims for discretionary housing payments, and that was at the point we visited in June. So we're a bit further down the line now, and it would be interesting to know where they're at now. And also, which was interesting, is that at that point, even as far back as June, they were reporting that Scottish Welfare Fund demand locally has been higher than anticipated. So it's a council that feels they have particular issues, particular problems, and are seriously concerned that these are not being addressed by the Westminster Government's welfare changes.
Much longer the comprehensive report. Does anyone have any comments or specific questions, Alex?
The one thing that jumps out to me is the fact that it's reported, or in this report, that demand locally for the Scottish Welfare Fund has been higher than anticipated. That's interesting in that it runs contrary to some of the information we're getting where demand has actually been lower than anticipated. And we will probably have to get to the bottom of that. I wonder if it might be possible to get a little more information on that point, so that we can perhaps compare the experience in Dumfries and Galloway to the experience in other areas.
That'd be useful.
Sounds good.
That'd be useful.
Yeah.
Ken, you want to ask?
Yeah, thanks very much, Linda. It's very helpful. There was this point here, which was one of the barriers to digital access. I think it is asking a lot, I think, for people to do all this online. And you're saying here need to change claimant and staff expectations. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
Well,
what are the current expectations?
Well, what I sort of picked up from that was because of the nature of the area and the sort of locality of some of that kind of service that had happened before. There was very much a culture of being able to sit down with somebody and work it through, and that the officer would actually do most of it for you. So because of the changes that are being imposed in the welfare system and the recognition that people, to try and work through this, are going to have to be more computer literate, they're going to have to do a lot more of these things themselves, bearing in mind that if you make mistakes in the form, could end up you're visiting a food bank, you know, or in some cases getting fined if it's deemed of that level. There was very much a wish to try and make people more self-sufficient in their ability to make claims. And that worked for both clients and staff, because where staff are very, very used to helping folk, it's quite difficult to actually sit back and say, no, you have to do this completely on your own now. So it was the expectations on both sides of how the system should work.
Mm-hmm. No, the reason I ask is because the alternative would be that clearly you could try and promote the idea of using digital access and so on. But if it doesn't work, maybe the alternative is that we rethink our approach and we think, you know, digital access is not the way, because it is going to be exclusive. Some people will never be able to cope with it. And
as long as you change it from our approach, because I would have nothing to do with the kind of stuff that's been imposed on people.
yeah, but is this not also about accessing Scottish Welfare Fund and other?
It's a DWP
simply
pilot.
DWP. Simply,
Yeah.
So I mean, no, I just mean government generally.
It may well be interesting to convener to ask on this and the other pilots, when you consider, you know, how long ago it is we visited them, you know, what the sort of update is on these generally.
Yeah, I think they all indicated that they would keep us informed, so it shouldn't be too difficult. I could probably ask the clerks to clarify the
So
situation.
council tax reduction not be claimed through the system either?
I don't know, Ken, is the quick
clearly we're
answer to
responsible.
that.
It's just that we're responsible for that, that's all.
Simon, you wanted to
I was
clarify?
going to mention that we have a session scheduled for later this year looking principally at discretionary housing payments, and our intention was to focus mainly on the pilots that we had visited, which would then give an update of where things have got to.
Perhaps we could address Ken's issues as well.
Annabelle?
Yeah, just for clarity, I mean, I think it's important to clarify this is a DWP pilot, and it's the DWP, the UK Westminster Government, that has said that all applications in principle must be online. So that's where this digital inclusion exclusion debate, you know, stems from, and that's what also the committee has looked at to a reasonable degree over the past while. So.
Replies? Well, thanks very much, Linda. That was very helpful, and we will take that forward and keep an eye on the information you received and the information we received from all of the pilots that we visited over the past few months. That brings us to the end of our public part of the meeting this morning. We now go into private session. I'll give us a few minutes to organise the room.